this thing?
I'll get something to clean that up.
You are here because someone decided to give you a paycheck. Act like it.
No, that can't be.
That is not a janitor's stillness.
Victor Aldrin, I know what you...
And the coffee hit the floor before anyone understood what had happened. 1 second, Victor Aldrin was walking. The next, 12 ounces of dark roast described a slow, perfect arc through the lobby air and landed across the front of his charcoal jacket, hot, then spreading, and the cup bounced once against the cart handle and rolled to a stop near the base of the second marble pillar. The man holding the mop didn't move. He just looked, not with fear, not with apology, and with the particular calm of someone who had stood in worse moments than this, and knew from experience that the first few seconds after an explosion were not the time to run. Victor Aldrin lowered his phone. He looked at his jacket, then up at the man in the blue uniform, and the lobby went quiet in the way lobbies go quiet when something that was supposed to stay underground has just broken the surface. That was how it started. And that was how it always started, with something ordinary going wrong, and with everyone in the room waiting to see who would flinch first. Darnell Webb did not flinch. Darnell Webb was 42 years old and had not flinched at things considerably worse than spilled coffee. And he had not flinched in a briefing room in Fort Bragg in March of 2017 when he was handed a mission package that had already been compromised by the time it reached his hands. And he had not flinched at the memorial service 3 weeks later, standing in a row with 7 other men who had come back from a place where 3 of their brothers had not. And he had not flinched through 3 years of civilian life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes, or through the 2 years after that, when he finally understood what he needed to do and started doing it. And he was not going to flinch now because a rich man had walked into his cart while looking at his phone. "And move this thing," Victor said. The words came out quiet, precise, like each one had been individually considered before release. Darnell looked at him. "I'll get something to clean that up. Not fast, not slow, just even." The voice of a man reading a weather report, and Victor's expression shifted. Not dramatically. It compressed, the way certain faces compressed when they encounter resistance they did not expect and are not equipped to process gracefully. "You'll get something," he repeated, like the words tasted wrong. "And that's your response?" "Yes, sir." "You don't apologize. I said I'd clean it." Someone near the reception desk pulled in a breath. Someone else stopped walking mid-step. Around them, the morning lobby of Crestfield Tower had become an audience without intending to. 30 people, and maybe more, all of them watching. Victor Aldrin was not a man who needed an audience to feel powerful. He had the kind of authority that didn't require witnesses, but he had one now, and which meant the next 30 seconds would need to accomplish 2 things at once, and put this man back in the correct position, and then do it in a way that reminded everyone watching what the correct positions were. "And do you know who I am?" Victor said. "Yes, sir. Then you understand what I'm saying when I tell you that this," he gestured at his jacket, "is not a small matter." "I'll get something to clean it," Darnell said again. Same words, same tone. A third time now. And somehow that was worse than if he'd raised his voice. Because there was nothing to push against, no fear to feed off, and just this man, and this unremarkable-looking man in a blue maintenance uniform, and who was simply standing there, saying the same thing over and over, with the composure of someone who had been through a great deal worse than this conversation, and found it, and on some level, and almost restful by comparison. And Victor stepped closer. "Let me tell you something," he said, lowering his voice to the register that was not quite private, but was designed to feel personal. "I don't know what you thought was acceptable at whatever facility you worked at before this one, but here, in this building, you are here because someone decided to give you a paycheck. That paycheck requires you to do your job without creating situations that I have to deal with at 7 in the morning." And he paused. "Are we clear?" Darnell looked at him. 1 second. 2. "I'll get something to clean it, sir," he said. Victor stared at him for 3 full seconds. The lobby held what it had. Then he turned away. "And get me Janet," he said to no one in particular, and walked toward the private elevator with the stride of a man who had said what needed saying and was already done with this conversation. Darnell watched him go, and then he bent down and collected the fallen cup and took a cloth from the lower shelf of his cart and began cleaning the coffee off the marble floor. And around him, the lobby slowly exhaled. Conversations picked back up. Footsteps resumed, but not everyone looked away. Celeste Aldrin was still watching. She was 34 and she had been standing near the elevator bank on her way to the 9th floor when it happened, and she had her tablet in her hand. She had been about to say good morning to the receptionist, and she had watched the whole thing instead. She was her father's daughter in a lot of ways. She had his eyes and his precision, and his ability to read a room without appearing to. And what she didn't have, and had spent most of her adult life quietly aware of not having, was his particular comfort with cruelty. The small, clean kind, the kind that was technically deniable but left marks. She had watched the janitor take it, and what she kept coming back to, standing there with her tablet forgotten at her side, was not the coffee or the shouting or even her father's face, and it was the janitor's hands. How still they were. Not gripped too tight, which would have meant suppressed panic. Not loose, which would have meant indifference. Just. Still. The hands of a man who had already decided before this moment that this moment would not move him, and that was not a janitor's stillness. She didn't know what it was yet, but she filed it away and walked to the elevator because she was her father's daughter in the ways that mattered, and she didn't ignore things that didn't fit the picture. 1 floor below street level, in the small room that smelled of old coffee and monitor glow, Elroy Banks had already seen everything. And he was 58 years old and built the way men who have spent their lives in physical work are built, wide and settled, and carrying a kind of weight that had nothing to do with size. He'd been head of security at Crestfield Tower for 6 years, and before that, 11 years in private security contracts across 3 states, and before that, and 9 years in the Army, and 2 tours, and the kind of experience that you didn't bring up in small talk, because there was no way to explain it in small talk. And he had 8 monitors. He watched all of them. He had been watching monitor 3, the lobby feed, when the cart got hit. He'd leaned forward when Victor started talking, and then the janitor had done the thing. The thing with the stillness and the same sentence 3 times, and Elroy Banks had gone very quiet, and he reached forward and pulled up the zoom on monitor 3. The face filled the screen, older, heavier at the jaw. 7 years heavier, maybe. But the posture was the same. The way the weight was carried was the same. And that specific quality of readiness that looked like calm, because it was past the point of needing to advertise itself. And you only got that from a particular kind of training, and done seriously, and over a long time, and in places most people never went. And Elroy sat back. His coffee was on the desk in front of him, and he didn't touch it. No, he said to the empty room, quietly, that can't be. But the screen said it was. Darnell Webb's first day at Crestfield Tower had been 14 months ago, and he had arrived with a reference letter from a facilities management company in Indianapolis that Elroy had run a standard check on. Everything clean, nothing flagged. The man mopped floors, cleaned filtration units, managed the waste disposal on floors 7 through 14, and he did his job without complaint. He was early, consistently. He was quiet, consistently. He was also, Elroy was now almost certain, not who the HR file said he was. Or rather, he was exactly who the HR file said he was. But the HR file had no idea who that actually meant. And Elroy picked up his coffee, put it down again without drinking. He needed to make a phone call, but not yet. Not until he was sure. Darnell finished his morning rounds at 9:40, and he went to the staff break room in the basement, poured himself a cup of coffee from the machine that was always slightly too hot, and tasted faintly of the machine before it, and then sat at the table in the corner that was always empty because it was next to the supply closet, and smelled faintly of industrial solvent, and he ate a sandwich. He did not read, and he sat with his hands around the cup and looked at the wall and did what he had learned to do in a lot of rooms over a lot of years, and which was nothing, and on the outside. And while inside, he was doing everything. And the encounter with Victor Aldrin had gone exactly as he'd calculated it would. Not the coffee. That was accidental. But the aftermath. The way Victor had talked to him, and the specific type of humiliation. and the quiet, precise, and personal kind that was designed not to create a scene, but to establish a hierarchy. And that was useful information. Not because Darnell hadn't expected it, but because it confirmed what the documents and the overheard conversations and 14 months of careful observation had already built in his head. And Victor Aldrin was a man who needed people below him, not as employees. Not even of his existence as proof of something he required constant renewal of. Men like that made mistakes. And they made mistakes because they never really looked at the people they considered beneath them, and which meant those people could do things right in front of them, and in plain sight, and never be seen. And 14 months of not being seen, Darnell had learned to use invisibility a long time ago, and in a lot of different kinds of rooms. A blue uniform in a corporate lobby was just the most recent version of a skill set that had been built in places considerably less comfortable. He finished his sandwich. He threw the wrapper away. He went back to work, and there was a woman on the 12th floor named Beverly Marsh who had worked administrative support for 11 years and knew everything about everyone in the building. And, not because she sought it out, but because the copy room where she spent most of her day was adjacent to the break room. And people talked freely around the woman making their copies the way they talked freely around the man mopping the floor. And over 14 months, and in small pieces, and the way you collect things by being in the right place consistently, rather than by asking. And Darnell had learned from Beverly and others like her, and that Victor Aldrin had fired 3 assistants in 2 years, and the current one, Janet, and stayed because she had developed a system for anticipating his moods that bordered on the predictive, and that the legal department worked late every Thursday without fail, and that the shredder on 12 ran from noon to 1 on those same Thursdays, which was interesting, and that Senator Boyd Garrett visited on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month and always used the private elevator, and always arrived without an official entry in the security log, and had always left via the loading dock. And Beverly didn't know what any of it meant. Darnell did. He had known what it meant since 3 years before he ever walked through the Crestfield Tower employee entrance, and he had known since the night in a rental car in Indianapolis when he had opened a laptop and found, after 18 months of looking at things from the wrong angle, the thread he had been searching for, and a company name, an indirect payment, a subsidiary that existed for 11 months and was dissolved 2 weeks after the events of March 2017, Aldrin Defense Group. He had sat with that name for a long time. Then he had found the job listing, and Operation Coldwater had been the kind of mission that didn't exist on paper until it had to, and a joint operation, and sensitive, and with a target in the Atlanta metro area, and a facility being used for the transfer of defense assets outside the approved channels. And the intelligence had been solid. 3 separate sources, verified against each other. The kind of intelligence you trusted because you had to trust something if you were going to do the job. Darnell had led the team. 8 men went in, and the 3 who didn't come back had walked into a corridor that was supposed to be clear, in position, in the dark, waiting. Not stumbled upon, not a coincidence. Cedric Allen had been 31 years old, and he had 2 kids and a wife who made the best food Darnell had ever eaten at a team dinner 2 Christmases before. And Raymond Okafor had been 28, just engaged, the kind of person who made every room slightly more alive than it had been before he entered it. Jerome Banks had been 25, the youngest. He had a laugh that was too loud for most rooms and perfect for all of them. And they had walked into that corridor because someone had told the people waiting exactly where they would be. The investigation had lasted 14 months and arrived at nothing. No charges, and no accountability, and a report that cited complexity and insufficient evidence, and which translated, and in the language Darnell had learned to read over years of operating inside institutional structures, too, and someone important is being protected, and that protection is going to hold. And he had read the report 4 times. Then he had stopped waiting for the institution to do what it was constitutionally incapable of doing, and started doing it himself. The afternoon passed the way afternoons at Crestfield Tower passed, and Darnell moved through the building's routines, with the attention of a man who was doing 2 things at once, the job that was visible, and the job that wasn't, and filters checked, waste sorted, floors on 9 and 10 done before 3. The private elevator usage logged mentally, not on paper, because paper could be found. He had been doing this for 14 months. He had most of what he needed, not all of it, and the 2 documents he still required lived on the 38th floor, in a filing system that didn't connect to the building's general network, in Victor Aldrin's private office. Not because he'd confirmed it through access, and because he'd confirmed it through process of elimination, and everything else had eventually appeared in the 12th floor recycling, and or in a conversation near the copy room, and or in a document sent through the general server that his contact had helped him access. And these 2 items had appeared nowhere, which meant they were somewhere deliberate. He was working on it. At 4:50, he ran into Celeste Aldrin, not literally, in the corridor outside the freight elevator on the east side, where he was doing his end-of-day round, and she came through the stairwell door the way she'd done last time, coat on, something working behind her eyes. She stopped when she saw him. "Mr. Webb," she said. He kept his hands on the cart. "Ms. Aldrin." She didn't move toward the main hallway, and she stood in the corridor with the specific posture of someone who has been thinking about something all the day and has finally decided to walk toward it instead of around it. "I want to say something," she said, "and about this morning. It's fine, it isn't." She said it simply, not dramatic. He spoke to you the way he speaks to people he's decided don't matter, and I stood there and watched it happen. Darnell looked at her. "You didn't do it." "No, I watched it, and, which is a different kind of thing." She held his gaze. "I've been watching it for a long time, actually. Not just with you, with a lot of people in this building." And she paused. "I keep telling myself it's just his manner. That underneath it, She stopped. "I'm not sure I believe that anymore." Darnell said nothing, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who has just said something more honest than they intended and is next deciding whether to pull it back. She didn't pull it back. "I notice things," she said. "It's what I do. I noticed the way you held your hands this morning, and the way you stood." She paused. "People who've been through difficult things stand differently. I don't know what you've been through, but it's visible if you're looking." He kept his face quiet. "I'm not asking you anything," she said, "and I just wanted you to know that I saw what happened this morning, and that I don't think it was acceptable." He looked at her for a moment. "Good evening, Ms. Aldrin," he said. She almost smiled. It wasn't an entirely happy expression, but it was real. "Good evening, Mr. Webb." She walked to the main corridor. He went back to the cart. But she had confirmed something he'd been tracking for 2 months. Celeste Aldrin was not her father. She saw things. She remembered them. And she was reaching, slowly. And the way people who are paying attention reach when the picture they've been living inside stops adding up, and towards something she couldn't yet name. And he filed that away and went back to work. And the parking structure was 2 blocks east of the building, on a street that had been in the process of construction for the better part of a year, and was therefore mostly empty after 6 in the evening. And Darnell parked his truck in the far corner, under a light that had been broken since his 3rd week and had not been reported to the city because he had not reported it. He sat with the engine off. He did not open the wooden box, and, not tonight, he had other things to hold. He thought about Cedric Allen's kids instead. 7 and 9 now, growing up in a house in Birmingham where the photographs on the wall included a man who had gone to work one morning and not come home. And he thought about Raymond Okafor's mother, Sandra, and who had filed a wrongful death claim and settled it for money she probably never touched, and because touching it would have required deciding what it meant to take it. And he thought about Jerome Banks at 25, calling his brother every Sunday from wherever in the world the Army had put him that week, because that was who Jerome was. He thought about what it meant to have done this for 3 years. Outside the building, and then 14 months inside it. What it cost in the actual arithmetic of living, not the grand version, but the daily version. The calls not made, the Thanksgiving in a hotel room in Indianapolis because going home felt like lying, and the particular weight of knowing something that you couldn't share with anyone who would understand it, and carrying that alone in rooms where no one knew who you were. He thought about all of it without flinching, because it was his to carry. He had chosen it, and he was close enough now that the end of it was no longer theoretical. At 9:11 p.m., someone knocked on the passenger window. 2 taps, even spacing. Darnell turned, and Elroy Banks stood outside in a plain jacket and dark pants, and not his uniform. and with his hands visible at his sides, and which was either a coincidence or a deliberate signal. And Darnell didn't believe in coincidences. He held Elroy's gaze through the glass. 4 seconds. Then he rolled down the window. Neither of them spoke immediately. And this was the kind of silence that happened between people who had learned that a room told you more in the first 30 seconds than most conversations told you in an hour, and who were both using those 30 seconds. Elroy spoke first. "I know who you are." Darnell looked at him. "And I've known since this morning." And I pulled up the lobby camera and ran the zoom. Elroy's voice was level, the voice of a man who had also learned not to perform things. "My name is Elroy Banks. I served 9 years. 2 tours, 82nd Airborne. I was never Delta, but I was close enough to know what a Delta operator looks like when he's standing still in a lobby." He paused, which is nothing like a janitor. Darnell said nothing. "Your name was in the Coldwater Report," Elroy said, "and the unclassified version, which is mostly black bars and careful empty language. But the names of the men who didn't come back were in it. Those they left in." He stopped. "Jerome is my little brother." The air in the parking structure was cold and still, and no traffic from the street right now, no other cars moving, and just 2 men in a dark corner of a building that was mostly finished being constructed, and talking about something that had started 7 years ago and had been moving, and invisibly, and ever since. "And Jerome Banks," Darnell said. Elroy's jaw moved once, a small controlled adjustment, the only thing that moved on his face. 25 years old, Elroy said, youngest of 3, called me every Sunday, didn't matter where he was. He paused, and last call was February 2017. He said the mission felt right, said his CO was solid. A pause. He meant you. Darnell absorbed that. "Why haven't you flagged me?" he said. 14 months. You've had 14 months. I thought about it. And Elroy didn't look away. For about 45 seconds. Then I thought about what it means that you're here. What you came to do. He looked directly at Darnell. "You didn't come here to cause trouble. You came here because you found something." "Yes. And you've been building on it." "And yes." Elroy nodded, the nod of a man who had already made this decision before he walked over here and was now simply confirming it out loud. "And I've been in that building for 6 years," he said. "I have access to things you can't reach from where you're standing." He paused. I want to finish this." Darnell looked at him for a long moment. The cold came in through the open window. Neither of them moved, and Jerome trusted people carefully, Darnell said. "I know. He learned it from me." Elroy held his gaze. But when he trusted someone, he meant it. And the only time he mentioned his CO by name was that last call. And he stopped. He trusted you. Darnell sat with that. He thought about Jerome Banks at 25, finding a phone wherever the Army had put him, calling his brother every Sunday. He thought about what it meant that Elroy had been in this building for 6 years, and not 6 years after. 6 years in this specific building, on this specific floor, watching this specific man come and go every day. "How long have you known it was this building?" Darnell said. And Elroy was quiet for a moment. 4 years. He paused. "I couldn't prove it. I had a direction but not a destination. And I knew that going at it wrong meant it went nowhere." He looked at the ground, then back up, so I waited. Darnell looked at him. "How?" he said. "And 4 years of waiting." Elroy's expression did something that was not quite a smile. "Jerome would have called that ironic," he said. "And me learning patience, that was always his department." Darnell was quiet. "Then I'm close. 2 documents I can't reach. Both on 38. Both in Aldrin's private office. I have access to floors you don't." "I know. Building master key, elevator override, and camera loop capability on a 40-second delay." He said it without pride. "Just inventory. I've never used any of it. I've been waiting for a reason that was solid enough. And now?" Elroy looked at him. "And now you're sitting in a parking garage 2 blocks from the building, where the man who got my brother killed has his office on the 38th floor," he said. "And you've been inside that building for 14 months doing something I couldn't do alone." He paused. "And that's solid enough." Darnell looked at the steering wheel for a moment. He thought about everything that came before this. 3 years outside, 14 months inside, every morning with the cart and the clipboard and the counted cameras, and every piece of paper from the 12th floor recycling, every overheard conversation, every small, unremarkable Tuesday in a building where he was invisible by design. All of it had led here, to a parking garage, 2 men, 1 name between them. "All right," Darnell said. and Elroy nodded. They sat for a moment without speaking. Not because there was nothing to say, because some things didn't need to be said to be understood. And then Elroy said, quietly, and looking straight ahead through the windshield, at the concrete wall of the parking structure, and he really did say the coffee was terrible at that briefing. And Darnell looked at him, Jerome. He complained about Army coffee his entire service career. Elroy's voice was careful, the voice of a man carrying something fragile across a long distance. Last call February 2017. We talked for 20 minutes about coffee, and specifically bad coffee, why it was always bad, what the Army had against good coffee. He stopped. It's a ridiculous thing to remember. No, it isn't, Darnell said. Elroy was quiet. He was right, by the way, Darnell said, and the coffee was terrible. Elroy made a sound, low and short. Not quite a laugh, but close to what one sounds like when grief has been sitting on top of it for 7 years, and some of the weight has just shifted. They sat in the cold parking structure for a little while longer, and outside, Chicago kept moving, indifferent and enormous and completely unaware of what had just begun in its dark corner. Darnell rolled up the window. Tomorrow morning, Crestfield Tower would open at 6:15, and Victor Aldrin would step out of the private elevator at 6:52. The lobby would fill with people who would not look at Darnell Webb because Darnell Webb had nothing they needed to see. Tomorrow he would go back. He would push the cart. He would count the cameras. He would do the job that was visible and the job that wasn't, and with the same hands, and in the same blue uniform, and in the same building, where a man on the 38th floor had made a calculation in 2017, and 3 people had paid for it with everything they had. And he had been patient. He had 3 years and 14 months of patience stored up like fuel. He intended to use every last drop of it. The second week of October brought rain, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that made you stop on the sidewalk and look up, and just the low, gray, patient kind that Chicago did better than most cities, the kind that worked its way into everything slowly, into your jacket, into the smell of the lobby floor, and into the particular mood of a building where something had shifted, but nobody had named it yet. Darnell arrived at 6:10 on Wednesday morning and knew before he reached the lobby that something was different. Not different in a way he could point to, and just different in the way that spaces feel when people inside them are thinking harder than usual. The receptionist was at her desk 8 minutes early, and 2 men from the legal department were already in the elevator when he passed, talking in the half-voice people used when they weren't sure who was listening, and Janet, Victor Aldrin's assistant, and moved through the lobby at 6:40 with her jaw set and her eyes on the floor, and which meant Victor had already called, and which meant he was already in a particular kind of mood, and Darnell noted all of it. He pushed his cart to the east corridor and began the morning round, and by 7:30 he had covered floors 4 through 7, collected 2 bags of recycling from the overnight bins, and replaced the filter on the air handling unit outside the 8th floor conference room. And he had also passed the 12th floor copy room twice, once at 7:15 when it was empty, and once at 7:40 when Beverly Marsh arrived and began her day with a cup of tea, and the particular expression of a woman who already knew more than she intended to share, and he left her to it. He was in the hallway outside the freight elevator when Celeste Aldrin came through the stairwell door, and she was moving with purpose, which meant she had come down the stairs deliberately rather than taking the elevator, which meant she had wanted the time to think, and she had her coat on still, though she'd been in the building long enough to have taken it off. Her tablet was under her arm, and she was not looking at it. She stopped when she saw him. He kept his hands on the cart. "Good morning," she said. "Morning, Ms. Aldrin." And she didn't move toward the hallway. She stood in the corridor space between the stairwell door and the freight elevator, with the posture of someone who had made a decision and was now standing in it, checking its weight. "And I looked you up," she said. He didn't let anything change in his face. People do that sometimes. Not usually with a contact at the Department of Defense. She turned her phone toward him. On the screen was a photograph, military, dress uniform, and face, younger by nearly a decade, looking directly into the camera with the expression you learn to give cameras after enough years in service. Below the photograph, his name, his rank, his unit designation, and he looked at the phone, then at her. "Where did you find that?" he said. A commendation record from 2015, publicly accessible if you know the right database. She pulled the phone back. Most of your file is classified at a level my contact couldn't reach, but that photograph was attached to a public record. She paused. You didn't try very hard to hide it. I didn't think anyone here would look. She held his gaze. And why would a Delta Force Master Sergeant be mopping floors in a defense contractor's building? He said nothing. She took a breath. The kind you take when you're about to say something you can't unsay. I found something else. Independently, before I called my contact, and she looked at him steadily. Operation Coldwater. The freight elevator hummed somewhere above them. A door opened and closed on a distant floor. The hallway held its breath. Tell me what you found, he said. And not because he didn't know, because he needed to know what she knew and where she'd found it. A legal filing from 4 years ago. A wrongful death claim filed by a woman named Sandra Okafor, and her son was Raymond Okafor, 28 years old, who died in a military operation in March of 2017. She watched his face while she said it, which he noted. She was looking for something specific, and the settlement agreement cited a subsidiary of Aldrin Defense Group as a party to the claim, and the case was sealed. The docket entry wasn't. You went looking for sealed cases, he said. I went looking for anything connected to the phrase Operation Coldwater after I found it in your file. The docket entry came up in a secondary search. She paused. And I'm very thorough when I'm looking for something. He nodded once. That filing was supposed to be invisible. Most things that are supposed to be invisible aren't. They're just inconvenient to find. And she held the phone at her side. Her voice had dropped, not softer but quieter, the register of someone saying something true and wanting it to land precisely. Father's company paid that settlement. Yes, and which means my father's company was connected to what happened to those men. He didn't answer that. The answer was already in the room. How many men? She said. 3. He said the names the way he always said them, and not performed, not rushed. Cedric Allen, Raymond Okafor, Jerome Banks. She closed her eyes. 2, then opened them. Jerome Banks. Is that connected to Elroy Banks? Jerome was younger brother. Something moved through her expression that took a moment to settle. And Elroy has been here 6 years. Yes, before you. Yes, she absorbed that. He could see her building the picture, adding what she'd just learned to what she'd carried in, seeing how it changed the shape of things. And how long have you been working on this? All of it, not just here, 3 years outside. 14 months is inside, and you have something. Most of it. Not all. She looked at him, not the way people looked at him in the lobby, through him or past him. Directly. What do you still need? And documents that live on the 38th floor. They've never come down. Which means they're being kept deliberately. She was quiet for a moment, doing the math he could see her doing, and the cost of what he was asking, even implicitly. Who she was in relation to what he was describing. What it would mean to be standing where she was standing and make one choice versus another. I'm not asking you for anything, he said carefully. I want to be clear about that, and I know you're not. She looked at the floor briefly, then back up. My father did this, she said it quietly, to herself as much as to him, and giving it language for what might have been the first time. Not just the settlement, the thing that made the settlement necessary. The evidence points that way. The evidence you have. Yes, she nodded. Once. Slow, and the nod of a person who has arrived somewhere they didn't plan to arrive. I need time to think. Take what you need. Don't do anything that gets you removed from this building before I've finished thinking. He held her gaze, and understood. She started toward the main hallway, stopped without turning. Cedric Allen. Did he have family? 2 kids, Darnell said. 7 and 9 now. She stood still for a moment. Then she walked away. He listened to her footsteps until they turned the corner, and then he picked up the mop and went back to work. Theo Webb arrived on Thursday without calling ahead. Darnell was in the basement sorting recycling when his phone rang. Unknown number with a Chicago area code, and he stood up straight before he answered, which was not something he consciously decided to do. I'm out, said the voice. I've been standing here for 20 minutes, trying to decide if I was going to call. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Don't come in, and I'm not trying to come in. A breath on the line. Controlled frustration, the kind that came from someone who had been holding it in for a long time and was using a lot of energy to keep it in a little longer. And, can you come out? He finished the recycling first. He went out through the side entrance on the Sir Service Street and found Theo across the road, leaning against a building with his hands in his jacket pockets. 22 years old, and tall the way Darnell was tall, but carrying it differently. Like a person still deciding what to do with the height. And he had his mother's jaw and the look on his face that Darnell had seen before on people who had rehearsed a conversation so many times in their head that when the actual moment arrived, the rehearsal felt wrong, and they had to start over from nothing, and they stood looking at each other across the wet street. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Darnell said. "Would you have told me not to?" "A beat, probably." "Exactly." Theo pushed off the wall, which is why I didn't call. They found a diner 2 blocks east, and small and warm, with the particular honesty of a place that had been feeding people through worse weather than this for 30 years. They sat in a booth near the back, and Darnell ordered coffee. Theo ordered nothing, which meant he wasn't here to eat, which meant he had driven up from Atlanta with something on his chest that needed somewhere to land. They sat in silence for a moment. Darnell let it stretch. Theo never could. 2 years, Theo said. "And I know. You said a few months. You've been calling me every 2 weeks like I'm a dentist appointment." He looked at the table, at the rings left by previous cups. "And now I find out you're in Chicago mopping floors for a defense company." He looked up. "That's the part I keep getting stuck on. Not that you're gone, that you're here doing that. There's a reason. That's not an explanation." "No," Darnell said. "It isn't." Theo leaned forward, and he had his mother's way of doing that, using his body to say he was serious before his mouth caught up. "I'm 22. I know what the Army did to you, and I know about the men you lost. I know enough to have a real conversation, and I need you to have one with me right now." Darnell looked at his son. This was his son, and who had driven up from Atlanta without calling because he was worried enough to do that, which was its own kind of language, the kind that didn't need translating. And Cedric Allen, and Raymond Okafor, and Jerome Banks, and Darnell said. And Theo went still. "You remember those names? And the memorial. I was 15. You made me sit through the whole thing. You didn't complain once. I never forgot that." Theo was quiet, waiting. Those 3 men died because someone told the people waiting for them exactly where they were going to be. Darnell kept his voice even, and this was not a story that got louder with feeling. It got quieter. Someone sold that information. The investigation that was supposed to find out who produced nothing. And, because certain people required protecting, and were protected. He paused. "I found out who. It took 3 years. And that person runs this building." Theo sat very still. "Victor Aldrin," Darnell said, "through a subsidiary, through a structure designed to be untraceable. And it took 3 years to find the thread and 14 months inside this building to confirm it." He looked at his son. "That's why I'm here. That's why I'm mopping floors." Theo stared at him. And he was doing what young men do when they receive information that changes the shape of a story they thought they already knew. Going back through it. Recalibrating. The silence lasted long enough to mean something. "You're not here because you lost your mind," Theo said finally. "And no, you're building a case. Yes, for 3 years. Yes, long and slow, the way you exhale when you've been carrying a particular tension and it's been given somewhere to go." And then he looked up. "Who else knows? Elroy Banks. Jerome was his brother. He's been here six years." Theo's eyebrows moved. He was already here when you. He found the same direction from a different starting point. Couldn't move on it alone. And now there are 2 of us, and a third who's starting to find her own way to it. "Victor's daughter," Theo said. He'd done his homework, or guessed well. "She's not her father." Theo absorbed that. He looked at the table again, then back up. "I want to help." No, not yet." He held his son's eyes. "I am this close, and I have been working toward this for 3 years, and I am not going to let anything knock it sideways in the last stretch." Theo looked like he was going to push back. He took a breath for exactly that purpose, and then he let it out again. "Fine," he said. The word carried everything he wasn't saying, which was a lot, but he was holding it correctly. "Fine, thank you. Don't thank me. I think this is the most insane thing I've ever heard." That's allowed. Theo almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. It changed his face in a way that made him look briefly like the kid Darnell remembered from before Atlanta, from before the divorce, from before everything that the years had done to the simple fact of a father and a son, and Darnell let himself see it without doing anything with it. Go back to Atlanta, he said. I'll call you when it's done. How long? Days, maybe a week. Theo looked at him, the look of someone deciding how much to believe. Then, okay. He slid out of the booth, paused. You look tired, and I'm fine. You look tired, Theo said again. Not as a question this time, just an observation. The kind his son offered sometimes when he didn't know what else to give, and then he walked out into the rain. Darnell sat with his coffee for a few minutes. Then he went back to work. The contract signing was set for Tuesday. A Department of Defense procurement deal worth $340 million, and Aldrin Defense Group as primary contractor. Senator Boyd Garrett as the government liaison who had steered the contract through its relevant committees. Press event, photographers, journalists from 3 defense publications. Elroy had flagged it to Darnell 2 weeks earlier, and they had been near the freight elevator, early morning, talking about the maintenance schedule in the way they always talked about things that had nothing to do with the maintenance schedule. Big event on 38 next Tuesday, Elroy had said. I heard, and they'll want maintenance up there, before and during. That would be useful. I can make useful things happen, Elroy had said. Nothing more, no details laid out, no plans named, just the shape of something agreed to and set aside until the time came. And the time came on Tuesday morning. Darnell arrived at 5:15. He came through the loading dock on his standard credentials, took the service elevator to 8, walked to the supply room where the upper floor event kit was stored, cart, fresh head, and the specific cleaning solution required for the 38th floor conference room. He signed it all out under his employee number, which would appear in no one's logs as unusual, because Elroy had made sure of that 2 weeks ago. And at 6:40 his phone vibrated once, a text from a number that didn't appear in any directory. Cleared for 38, service corridor active until noon. He pocketed the phone. He took the service elevator up. The 38th floor had its own quality of air, and he'd expected that. The higher floors of buildings like this were climate-controlled precisely, the way expensive things always were. The carpet absorbed sound. The lighting was warmer. The walls held artwork, chosen someone who actually knew what they were choosing, and everything on 38 communicated the same thing that the private elevator and the unlogged visits communicated. This floor operates by different rules than the rest of the building. Victor Aldrin's office was at the north end, and the conference room for the signing was adjacent, connecting door open. Darnell began working the corridor outside. Methodical, no hurry. The cart moved with its familiar sound, the sound that said nothing worth attending to was happening here. And he had until 7:50 before people started arriving on this floor. At 7:04, he heard paper moving in the office, a drawer opening, closing. Victor was already here. Darnell moved the cart 6 feet further from the office door and kept working. At 7:12, a second voice entered the office. He kept moving. Cart and mop. Cart and mop. And he had spent 14 months learning the difference between the sound of a conversation people expected to be private and the sound of a conversation people knew was private. This was the second kind, and lower, more careful. The door not fully closed because who closed a door all the way against a janitor in the hallway? The first voice was not Victor's, older, a careful flatness to it. The subsidiary transfer. It needs to be done before the contract posts. And Victor, it's already handled. Marlowe did it yesterday. There cannot be a traceable line between the subsidiary and the DoD payment. Not any line. There isn't one. I've told you this. And you told me last time, too. A pause that had something under it. History, maybe. Or a particular kind of fear wearing the clothes of caution. Boyd, Victor's voice, quieter now. You have a role in this arrangement. You have a percentage. And what you do not have is the right to call me at 7 in the morning to audit decisions I made 3 weeks ago. Are we done with this? A silence. Then shoes on the floor, and someone crossing to the window, then back. Senator Garrett's voice. After today, it's clean. Everything before. All of it. Victor, everything before has been clean for years. The wrongful death claim was settled confidentially. 7 figures. 7 years ago. And there were 3 families. 2 settled. The third had nothing. There was nothing to find. Darnell had stopped moving the cart, and he stood in the corridor, with his hands on the handle and his eyes on the middle distance, and he focused very carefully on the specific sensation of his fingers against the metal and the temperature of it, the slight roughness of the grip tape that had started to peel on the left side. He breathed once, The third family had nothing because the evidence had been buried well enough that 3 years of looking almost wasn't enough. Almost. He breathed again and picked up the mop, continued. The conference room filled by 8:30. Victor at the head of the table, and Senator Garrett arriving at 8:42, working the room with the fluency of a man who had been performing warmth in professional settings for so long that the performance and the thing itself had become indistinguishable, and photographers along the east wall. 4 men from the Department of Defense arranged on one side of the table, like they were posing for a photograph that had already been decided. Darnell was at the far end of the room near the window, and a catering setup from the previous evening had left a residue along the baseboard that genuinely needed attention, and he worked it slowly with a cloth and crouched and close to the floor, and the most invisible position in any room, and nobody looked at him. At 8:57, the main door opened. An aide came in first, looked around, stepped aside. Colonel Arthur Bryn walked in, and 64 years old, and carrying every year of it in the particular way that military men carried age, not as diminishment but as accumulation. Silver-haired, straight through the shoulders, and he moved through the room the way men who have commanded other men in difficult places moved through rooms, with a peripheral awareness that never announced itself. And his name was on the guest list as an industry advisor, which was accurate as far as it went. And what the guest list did not say was that Arthur Bryn had written a classified after-action report in 2017 flagging that the intelligence breach in Operation Coldwater had originated from a commercial source. He had been told it was being handled, and he had signed the report. He had spent 7 years not being able to unsign it. Darnell knew this because he had spoken to Bryn twice on the phone over the past year, and brief, careful, but real. Bryn worked the greeting circuit, handshakes, the professional small talk of men who operated at this level and had learned to do it efficiently. He moved through the room without hurry. Then he turned toward the far window, and his eyes moved the way they always moved. Not searching, just taking inventory. The habit of a man who had spent decades knowing that the things you didn't notice were often the things that mattered most. His gaze reached the far corner, and stopped. Darnell kept working the baseboard. He did not look up. 3 seconds passed. 4. Then Arthur Bryn walked across the conference room, all the way across it, through the photographers and the DOD men and the journalists and the catering staff. And he stopped in front of Darnell and brought his right hand up in a formal military salute. The room went quiet in layers. Darnell straightened. He looked at Bryn. He returned the salute. Precise, correct, the way it was done. And Victor Aldrin turned from the head of the table. "I heard you were in Chicago," Bryn said in a normal voice. "Not performing, just saying it. I didn't know you were here. 14 months, sir. We should talk." "Yes, sir." And Victor Aldrin had gone the color that certain men went when blood left their face faster than they could manage. His expression was controlled at the center. At the edges, it was doing something that required visible effort to contain, and Senator Garrett had turned from the window. He was very still, the stillness of a man who had learned not to show what he was calculating. Celeste Aldrin was near the door with a folder in both hands, and she was not looking at Darnell. She was looking at her father's face, and the signing continued. And there was too much momentum, and too many cameras, and too many people who had traveled to be there, and for it not to. But something had entered the room with that salute, and it didn't leave. And it sat in the air under the professional conversation, and the flash of cameras and the careful handshakes, patient and exact, the way true things sat when they had finally found a room large enough to be in. And Bryn caught Darnell in the corridor outside afterward, when the room had begun to empty. "Tell me you have something," he said. "Most of it. Documents? Enough. 2 more that would close it completely." "I'm close to those." And Bryn looked at the closed office door at the end of the corridor. And Victor had gone back in at 11:03 and had not come out. "I wrote that report in 2017, he said. "I flagged the breach. I was told it was handled, and I accepted that." He stopped. "I should have pushed." "Yes," Darnell said, not harshly, just honestly, "and you should have." Bryn took it without argument. "What do you need from me now? What you just did in that room was most of it." Darnell paused. "And the rest is in motion." Bryn looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man assessing something for its actual worth, rather than its apparent worth. "All right," he said. Then he put his hand out. Darnell shook it. Bryn walked toward the elevator, and Darnell went back to the supply corridor to return the event kit. Elroy was in the security room when Darnell came down at noon. The monitors showed 38 quiet, the event footprint already being dismantled by the contracted cleaning crew, and Victor's parking space on camera 4 had been empty since 11:17. "He saw you," Elroy said. "He saw Bryn salute." Yes, Elroy looked at the monitors. He had the expression of a man who had held something tightly for a very long time and could feel it beginning to be possible to set it down. Not yet, but close. Is it time? Almost. Darnell stood beside him and looked at the camera showing the empty 38th floor. And he's going to move. Men like him, when they feel it shifting, they do something. Reach out, apply pressure, try to manage it. He paused. We need to let him try. Elroy was quiet for a moment then, and if what he tries is something that puts people in the way, then we handle it. And Elroy nodded. He put one hand flat on the desk in front of him and looked at it. Jerome called me every Sunday, he said, and not looking at Darnell, looking at his hand. Last call was February 2017, 3 weeks before Coldwater. He stopped. We talked about coffee, specifically the coffee at the briefing that week, why it was so bad. And Jerome had a theory about it involving the altitude of the water supply system, and I told him that made no physical sense, and he said I didn't understand the science. A pause. He was wrong about the science. He was usually right about everything else, and Darnell said nothing. He said the mission felt right, Elroy said his CO was solid. He finally looked at Darnell. I need you to know that I've always known that. Whatever happened in that corridor was not on you. It was never on you. The security room was very quiet. And thank you, Darnell said. Elroy nodded once, turned back to his monitors. Darnell left him to it. At 9:47 that evening, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. And Chicago. This is Celeste Aldrin. Ms. Aldrin, I have what you need. Her voice was steady. Underneath the steadiness was the specific quality of a person who has made a large and permanent decision and is now standing on the other side of it, and the internal communications from February 2017. The ones documenting the information transfer to the subsidiary. They were in my father's private filing system. She paused. He gave me access 2 years ago for strategic planning purposes, and he trusted you with it, Darnell said. He trusted that I would never look at anything that wasn't relevant to my work. A pause. He was wrong about that. Celeste. He used her first name without deciding to. And if you send those documents, there is no version of this where it doesn't become known that they came from inside the company, from inside his files. I know. That changes things for you. I know that too. And her voice didn't waver. I heard him this morning, through the office door, before the signing. He called it the Coldwater thing. He said it was clean. He said it had been clean for years. She stopped. And I've been sitting in my car since 2 o'clock this afternoon, trying to decide if what I heard was what I thought it was. Another pause. It was what I thought it was. Darnell was quiet. Who do I send them to? She said. And Arthur Bryn. I'll give you his contact. He has connections at the Inspector General's office. People who won't be stopped by a phone call from Senator Garrett's office. Okay. Send everything tonight. Before he has a chance to move anything. I already have them copied, and I've had them copied since 4 o'clock. She paused. I told you I was thorough. He gave her Bryn's contact information. She read it back correctly. Celeste. He stopped and let a moment go by. Cedric Allen had 2 kids, 7 and 9. Raymond Okafor's mother filed that wrongful death claim and settled it, and I'd bet she hasn't touched the money once in 4 years. He paused. And what you're doing tonight matters to people who have been waiting for it for a long time. A silence on the line, short, real. Send me their names, she said, all 3 of them, spelled correctly. I want to have them right. And he spelled them out. She said nothing while he did, but he could hear her writing. Good night, Mr. Webb, she said. Good night. She hung up. Darnell sat in the truck in the parking structure, and the rain had stopped somewhere in the last hour and left the air cold and clean, the kind of cold that came after rain in October and felt like the start of something rather than the end of it. He thought about the 3 years before this building and the rental car in Indianapolis, the laptop and the subsidiary name appearing on the screen at 2 in the morning, the long months of following a thread that went cold and then warm again and then cold again before it finally led somewhere. He thought about this morning and Victor's voice through the office door, the Coldwater thing. said the way you said something that had been managed and filed and was no longer your problem. And he thought about Bryn standing in that conference room and walking across it, through everyone, to stand in front of a man in a cleaning uniform and raise his hand. And he thought about Elroy saying he should have been right about the science, but was right about everything else. He thought about Theo almost laughing in the diner booth, not quite, but almost. He sat with all of it. He did not open the wooden box. And he had carried those three faces long enough. They could rest tonight while he held what was coming instead. Tomorrow morning, Crestfield Tower would open at 6:15, and Victor Aldrin would be doing what men like Victor Aldrin did when they felt the ground moving, and reaching for phones, and calling attorneys, and trying to shape what was about to become unshapeable, and let him try. 11 documents were already on their way to the Inspector General's office, and Darnell Webb was going back to work in the morning. Wednesday morning arrived without ceremony. No rain, just the threat of it, and the sky that particular shade of gray that Chicago wore when it was still deciding, low and heavy and patient, the kind of sky that made the city look like it was thinking. Darnell arrived at 6:10. Same entrance, same badge, same cart waiting in the supply room where he'd left it the night before. And he checked the wheels, checked the mop head, signed the daily log under his employee number, the way he had done every morning for 14 months. Nothing about the routine was different. Everything about the morning was. He could feel it before he reached the lobby, and buildings had moods, the way people had moods. And the mood of Crestfield Tower on this particular Wednesday was the mood of a place that had been running on one kind of energy for a long time and had woken up to discover the fuel had changed overnight. And the lobby staff arrived quieter than usual. The receptionist was at her desk before 6:30, and she was not doing the things she normally did first thing. She was watching the elevator, and Janet came through at 6:51, a full minute before Victor Aldrin's elevator typically arrived. And she had the look of a woman who had already received information she hadn't asked for and was deciding what to do with it. And 2 men from legal were in the corridor outside the 8th floor conference room at 7:05, talking in the way people talked when they needed to appear to be talking about something ordinary while actually talking about something else entirely. And Darnell moved through all of it with his cart and his clipboard and his morning round. He counted what he always counted: cameras, exits, faces. The faces were different this morning, not the faces themselves, but the quality of attention behind them. And people were looking at things they didn't usually look at each other, at their phones, at the elevator bank, at him. Not the way they usually looked at him, which was not at all. This was different. He'd pass someone in a corridor, and they'd look up a half second too long before they looked away. He didn't know exactly what they'd heard or how much of it, and word moved through a building like water moved through old pipes, and fast in some places, and slower in others, and always finding the cracks you didn't know were there. And he finished floors 4 through 6 by 8:15 and was heading toward the supply room when Elroy materialized at his left shoulder. And Elroy had a way of appearing without announcement that had stopped surprising Darnell sometime in the 3rd month. And he moved through the building the way men move through spaces they had spent years learning, and without friction, and without announcement, and as if the building made room for him out of habit. An Inspector General's office called at 7:05 this morning, Elroy said. He was looking straight ahead, walking at the pace of a man doing nothing in particular. Bryn's contact moved faster than I expected, and they spoke to the building's legal department at 7:40. He paused. Victor's attorney arrived through the private entrance at 7:58. Before Victor, Darnell said. Victor's car is still in the garage. He's been here since 6:30, and he didn't use the private elevator. He came in through the loading dock. Darnell absorbed that. And Victor Aldrin coming in through the loading dock was Victor Aldrin doing something he had never done. In the 14 months Darnell had been watching him, which was move through his own building in a way that reduced the chance of being seen. And Senator Garrett, Darnell said. His office put out a statement at 6:50. Personal reasons, stepping back from public duties pending review. 12 words. Cost him a significant amount of money to have those 12 words written, I'd imagine, and he'll let Victor take the front of it before he calibrates. That's what I'd do, Elroy said. He slowed slightly as they approached the junction near the freight elevator. Bryn will be here at 9, I know. He called last night. And Celeste? She'll be here. They reached the junction. Elroy turned toward the security corridor. He stopped. Jerome would have said something about this moment, Elroy said. Not looking at Darnell, looking at the corridor ahead of him, and something that would have made it both more serious and less heavy at the same time. He was good at that. He paused. I never figured out how he did it. Some people are just built that way, Darnell said, and Elroy nodded. Yeah, he started walking again. Yeah, some people are. Darnell watched him go. Then he picked up his cart and went back to the morning round. At 8:47, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, and the number was not saved, but he recognized the last 4 digits because he had been careful to remember them. He answered. Come up, Victor Aldrin's voice, stripped of its usual smoothness the way paint stripped from metal in weather, and flat and careful and trying not to show what was underneath. Darnell stood in the corridor on the 6th floor. Give me 10 minutes, he said. He finished the section of hallway he was working on. He put the cart in the supply alcove near the stairwell. He went to the staff bathroom on 6 and washed his hands and looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. The man in the mirror was 42 years old and wearing a blue maintenance uniform with a small embroidered logo above the left pocket, and he had been wearing variations of this face for a long time, in other uniforms, in other buildings, in other kinds of rooms. He dried his hands. He took the service elevator to 38. Victor Aldrin's office in the morning light was the same office it had always been, and walls of glass facing north and west. The city spread out below in the particular way. City spread out from height, reduced to pattern, stripped of the noise and smell and human friction that made them real at street level. And the view from up here was the view of a man who had spent his life above things, which was not the same as understanding them. Victor was standing at the window. He didn't turn around immediately, and the attorney, a thin man in a dark suit, whose name Darnell had looked up 3 months ago, sat in the chair to the left of the desk. He had a legal pad and a pen and the expression of a man who had been in rooms like this before and had learned that his job in the first minutes was to be present without being visible, and Victor turned. He looked different than he had looked 2 days ago. The difference was not dramatic. It was in small things. The suit was the right quality, but it had not been pressed this morning. There was something around his eyes that had not been there at the signing, and not grief, not exactly. More like the particular disorientation of a man who had lived for decades inside a structure he had built himself and was discovering for the first time that some of the load-bearing walls were hollow. And, sit down, Victor said. Darnell didn't move. I'm fine standing. Victor looked at him. He nodded once and moved to his desk and sat down behind it, which was what people did when they needed furniture between themselves and a conversation they hadn't planned for. And you know what's happening, Victor said. I have a general sense. The IG's office is initiating a formal review. My attorney tells me it expands into a criminal inquiry within the week. He said it with a flatness that was working hard to sound like control, and the documents that initiated this process originated from within this company. Darnell said nothing. From my files specifically, Victor said. Silence. Victor looked at him with the expression of a man trying to locate a seam in something that appeared seamless. And I need to understand what you want from being here. 14 months in that uniform, doing what you've been doing. He paused. People don't do something like this without wanting something. People like me, Darnell said, and Victor caught himself. A small recalibration, men with your background, men who ran those kinds of operations. He paused. I'm trying to have a conversation. No, Darnell said. You're trying to find out if there's a number, and if there's a position or an arrangement that makes this stop. He looked at Victor across the desk. There isn't. Victor's jaw tightened at the hinge. What I want, Darnell said, is for you to understand what you did, and not what it cost you, what it cost them. He kept his voice even. This was not a moment for anger. He had stored that anger carefully for 3 years, and he was not going to spend it here, in this office, on a man who would use it as a distraction. And Cedric Allen was 31 years old. He had 2 kids and a wife who used to send food to the team because that was who she was. And Raymond Okafor was 28 and 3 weeks from his wedding when he went on that mission. Jerome Banks was 25 and called his brother every Sunday from wherever the Army had put him that week. He paused, And those three men walked into a corridor that had people in it because you sold information about where they were going to be. You did that, and then you put a settlement in front of two families and called the third one a dead end and went on running your company. And Victor said nothing. The attorney did not move. Outside, 40 stories down, the city was doing what the city did. Completely unaware, completely indifferent. That was fine. The inquiry is going to go where it goes, Darnell said. I need you to stay out of its way. And no calls to contacts, no pressure on witnesses, no carefully worded statements designed to slow it down. Whatever comes of this process, you let it land, and if I don't have the ability to control, you're not being asked to control it, and you're being asked not to interfere with it. He held Victor's eyes. That's all. Victor looked at the desk, then back up. He looked like a man searching for a door in a room that didn't have one. There's nothing I can offer you, he said. More to the air than to Darnell. And no, Darnell said. There isn't. Victor nodded. A single, slow nod. The nod of a man who had arrived at the end of something and was recognizing it for what it was. And Darnell turned toward the door. Webb, he stopped. Did not turn around. They were Victor started. Started again. For what it's worth, they were good men. Darnell stood at the door, and he thought about what that sentence cost Victor to say, and what it was worth to the people it was about, and whether those two things were anywhere near each other. Ask me in 20 years, he said. He walked out. He was in the service elevator going down when his phone rang, and Theo. He answered before the second ring. What's happening up there? Theo's voice was doing the thing it did when he was trying to sound calmer than he was. I've been in the parking structure since 7. Elroy texted me. Elroy texted you. He has my number somehow. Dad, and what's happening? It's happening, Darnell said. Come inside. Tell the front desk you're with security. Elroy will clear you. A pause. Really? Come in, Theo. And he hung up. He rode the rest of the way down, watching the floor numbers change. The lobby had filled in the way lobbies filled when something large and uncertain was moving through a building's atmosphere. Not a scheduled gathering, not an event, and just people who worked in the space gravitating toward common ground, the way people always did when they needed to be near other people without knowing exactly why. 30, maybe 40 people, standing in loose arrangements and talking quietly, looking at phones, looking at each other. Looking, some of them, at the man in the blue uniform who came through the lobby hallway with his cart and moved to the edge of the space and left the cart there and stood without it for the first time. And he stood in the lobby of Crestfield Tower without his cart. It was a small thing. It felt significant in the way. Small things felt significant when they were actually something else in a thinner disguise, and he was aware of the shift in the room's attention. The way it turned toward him and then adjusted, recalibrated, tried to reconcile the blue uniform with the salute it had witnessed 2 days ago in the conference room above. Some people managed it. Some hadn't gotten there yet, and Elroy appeared near the reception desk. He caught Darnell's eye across the room and held it for a moment. Then he looked toward the main entrance. Arthur Bryn came through the glass doors at 9:03. And 2 people behind him, in civilian clothes, with the bearing of people who had been given specific instructions about how to dress for this building on this morning. Inspector General's office, and Bryn had called them the night before, and Darnell had listened to that call from the parking structure, with the window down in the cold. Behind them, Celeste Aldrin. She'd come from outside. Her coat was damp at the shoulders, and she had the look of someone who had not slept well, and had decided that this was fine, that today was not a day for looking rested, that there were more important things to look like. And Bryn came through the lobby without stopping to read the room. And he found Darnell the same way he'd found him in the conference room 2 days ago, by looking at the space the way men who had spent their careers in operational environments looked at spaces with purpose rather than hope. He crossed the lobby. He stopped in front of Darnell, and he came to attention and saluted for the second time. Except this time there was no signing ceremony, no press, and no photographers arranged along a wall, no contract on a table, just a lobby, a man in a work uniform, and a retired colonel making a choice about what respect looked like and who it was for. Some people in the lobby understood what they were seeing. Some didn't yet, and it didn't matter. Darnell returned the salute. Precise. Correct. Bryn put his hand out. I'm sorry it took this long, Bryn said. Quietly, directly, not performed. It did take too long, Darnell said. But you're here now. That was all. That was the honest version of it, and the only version worth giving. Theo came through the front entrance at 9:20, and he had the slightly lost look of someone who had been directed somewhere without full context and was navigating by instinct. He scanned the lobby and found his father standing near the center of it with a retired colonel and two people in suits, and the head of security, and a woman Theo didn't know but would figure out quickly. And he walked across the lobby. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask anything. He came and stood next to Darnell, close enough that Darnell could feel the proximity of him without turning to look. The simple, physical fact of his son standing beside him. And Elroy moved to Darnell's other side a moment later. Same way, no announcement, just present. Three men standing together in the lobby of Crestfield Tower on a gray Wednesday morning in October. And Darnell stood between his son and the brother of one of his dead, and he felt the weight of both of those things, and he did not look away from either of them. And at 10:20, a woman came across the lobby toward him. He recognized her, Beverly Marsh, Mr. Minister of Support, 11th year in this building, and she had told him things in the copy room that she hadn't known she was telling him, and she had no idea what those things had contributed to. And she was a woman of about 50, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the expression of someone who had been working up to something for a little while, and she stopped in front of him. "I work on the 9th floor," she said. "I've seen you in this building for over a year." She looked at him directly. "I have never once said good morning to you." He waited. "I'm sorry for that," she said. "Not for anything complicated, and just for that specifically. For not saying good morning." He looked at her for a moment. "Good morning," he said. She blinked, then a small, genuine smile. And, "Good morning," she said. She walked back to the elevator. Theo, beside him, said nothing. But Darnell felt him shift his weight slightly, the way people shifted when something had moved through them that they weren't ready to name yet. And at 11:30, Celeste called for the building's staff to gather. She stood at the center of the lobby without a microphone or notes, and without the prepared composure of someone who had planned to make a speech. She had been outside, and her coat was still on. She looked like what she was, a person who had spent the last 18 hours making the most consequential decision of her life and was now on the other side of it. She spoke without preamble. She said an inquiry was underway and would take time. And she said she couldn't speak to outcomes, but could speak to how the company would conduct itself while the process ran, which was with full cooperation, and without the kind of careful language designed to perform transparency while preventing it. And she said she was aware of the specific events that had brought this morning into being. Then she'd said the names: Cedric Allen, Raymond Okafor, Jerome Banks. She said them the way they deserved to be said, not rushed, not softened, and with the full weight of each one landing before the next. The lobby was very quiet. "The man who made this possible," Celeste said, "has worked in this building for 14 months. Most of us have walked past him every single day without looking." And she paused. "I want to say his name clearly, so everyone in this room hears it. Darnell Webb, Master Sergeant, United States Army, retired, and who did what he did not because he wanted recognition, not because he wanted a position, not because he wanted anything this building could give him." She stopped. Her voice had gone quieter, the kind of quiet that had weight in it, and he did it for three men who couldn't do it for themselves, and the lobby held what it held. Elroy was looking at the floor. His shoulders moved, just once. Theo was looking straight ahead with the expression of a young man using everything he had to let his face stay still. Darnell looked at his hands. He had large hands, deliberate hands, and they had done a lot of different kinds of work over the course of his life, and some of it the kind that appeared in commendation records, and some of it the kind that appeared in classified after-action reports, and some of it the kind that appeared in a janitorial log in the basement of a corporate building in Chicago. And he thought about Cedric Allen's hands in the photograph in the wooden box. The way they were always moving when Cedric talked, like his hands were part of the language. He put that thought down gently. Bryn found him near the freight entrance at 12:15, and the lobby had begun to thin. The two people from the IG's office were in a conference room on 14 with Victor's attorney. Victor had not come down. His car was still in the garage, and the formal process starts this week, Bryn said. "It'll take months, possibly longer. You'll need to give a statement. I expected that. The documents are solid. 11 of them, time-stamped, internal headers intact, and combined with what I'm providing from the 2017 report and the contacts I made this morning. He stopped. I'm saying it's enough. I know it's enough, Darnell said. I spent 3 years making sure it was enough. Bryn nodded. And he had something he was carrying, and Darnell had learned to recognize the shape of it over their 2 phone conversations, and the weight of a decision not made when it should have been made. The specific burden of having written a report that could have changed something, and having let it be buried, and having spent 7 years in the knowledge of that. In 2017, Bryn said, and I wrote the report. I flagged what I found. My commanding officer told me it was being handled, and I accepted that. I had a career, he stopped. There's no ending to that sentence that works. And no, Darnell said. There isn't. I know. I can tell you this, Darnell said. The work you put in this morning mattered. The call you made last night to your IG contact mattered. What you did in that conference room 2 days ago when you walked across the room, that mattered. And he paused. I'm not in a position to give you more than that. I'm not asking for more than that, Bryn said. He put his hand out, and Darnell shook it. He found Elroy in the security room at 2 in the afternoon, just the 2 of them, and the monitors showing the ordinary afternoon of a building processing something extraordinary and continuing its business anyway. Because buildings did that, and because the floors still needed cleaning, and the elevators still needed running, and the people on floors 3 through 7 still had work that was not connected to what had happened on 38, and Elroy was sitting with the posture of a man whose body had been running on something for 6 years and had just discovered the thing it was running on had changed into something else, and not exhaustion. Something more like the particular stillness that came after a long effort had been completed and the next thing had not yet arrived to take its place. How are you? Darnell said. Elroy looked at the monitors for a moment. Honest answer? Honest. I don't know yet. And he leaned back in his chair. For 6 years there was the thing I was doing here. The reason for being here. It organized everything else. He paused. And now that's done, and I'm not sure what's on the other side of it yet. I don't have a picture of that. You don't need a picture yet, Darnell said. Is that what it was like when you left the service? Similar underneath, different details, and he stood near the desk without leaning on it. I moved wrong for about a year after. Did things that didn't fit right. Tried to find something that was the same shape as what I'd had, and he paused. Then I stopped trying to find the same shape. What did you find instead? Darnell thought about that honestly. This, which I don't recommend as a general method. Elroy made a sound, and it was closer to a laugh than anything he'd produced in the months Darnell had known him. Not quite there, but genuinely close. Jerome would have laughed without qualification, Darnell thought. Jerome would have made it into a story. Tell me something about him, Darnell said, and Elroy looked at him. Jerome, tell me something I don't know. Elroy was quiet for a moment. He looked at the monitors, at the cameras showing the lobby and the corridors and the parking garage. Then he looked at his hands on the desk. He was terrible at cards, Elroy said, and genuinely, specifically terrible. Not in the way people are bad at cards when they can't remember the rules, and in the way people are bad at cards when they can remember every rule and still manage to lose consistently because they play the game like the point is to make it interesting rather than to win. And he paused. He used to say that winning wasn't the point, that the point was what happened in the middle. Darnell listened. He was right about that, Elroy said. He was right about a lot of things I didn't tell him. He was right about when I had the chance to. He stopped, and that's the specific thing I carry. Not the big things, the not telling him specifically at a specific moment that he was right. He knew, Darnell said, and maybe. I commanded him for 2 years, Darnell said. I know the difference between a man who knows he's valued and a man who doesn't. Jerome Banks knew. Elroy sat with that. He didn't argue it, and he just sat with it, and Darnell watched him take it in slowly, the way people took in things they had needed for a long time but had learned not to ask for. After a while, Elroy said, "What are you going to do now?" And give a statement to the IG. Answer what I know and what I can prove and let the rest of it be what it is. He paused, and then I'm going to go to Atlanta for a while. Elroy looked at him. Theo, he has a place. Second room. Elroy nodded slowly. Good, he said, and not as a comment on Atlanta. as a comment on the fact of a son and a father and a second room, and whatever would happen in it when two people who had been at a distance for 2 years stopped being at a distance. "And what about you?" Darnell said. Elroy looked at the monitors. "I'll stay a while, long enough to make sure the transition doesn't go sideways." He paused. "Celeste is going to need people around her who know what her father built and how it worked." He stopped. After that, he shrugged, and it was the shrug of a man for whom the question of after had been theoretical for so long that the answers was not yet fully imaginable. "And I'll figure it out," said. Elroy looked at him. "You sound certain about that." "I know what kind of man you are," Darnell said. "Men like you figure things out." Elroy was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, turned back to his monitors. Darnell left him to it, and Celeste found him in the supply corridor on the 4th floor at 3:15. He was doing an actual maintenance task, a filtration unit near the elevator shaft that had been on his list for 2 weeks, and that he had kept finding reasons to defer, and he was cleaning it now with the attention he gave everything, which was the full amount. She leaned against the opposite wall and watched him work for a moment without speaking, which was a quality he had come to associate with her, and the willingness to be in a space without filling it. "I spoke to Sandra Okafor this morning," she said. "A's mother." "He kept working," she cried, Celeste said, for a while. "Then she told me she'd been waiting for a call, and any call, that she'd been waiting to hear something from someone since 2017, and it was the waiting that had been the hardest part." She paused. 7 years of waiting for a phone to ring. Darchel said nothing. "I also spoke to Cedric Allen's wife, and she has the 2 kids, the 7- and 9-year-old. Celeste looked at the wall. She said she'd given up expecting anything, that she'd decided a long time ago that expecting something just meant being let down again, and she couldn't afford that anymore, and she stopped. She said the kids ask about their father every month still, like clockwork. Every month, he set down his cloth. He turned and looked at Celeste. She was not performing this. She was not building to something. And she was just telling him what she'd heard because she'd heard it, and it had weight, and she needed somewhere to put the weight. "You did something today that cost you," he said. "Yes, and it'll keep costing, and I know that. How are you holding it?" She looked at him with the expression that he had first noticed in the lobby 14 months ago, the one that didn't look through him or past him but at him. "And I keep thinking about the things I said to my father's employees on his behalf," she said. "Meetings I ran, presentations I gave, for years, about the company's values and the company's standards and the company's commitment to operating with integrity." And she paused. "I believed those things. I said them because I believed them. You couldn't have known, no, but I know now, and I knew something was wrong for longer than I admitted to myself." She looked at her hands. "That's the part I have to sit with." And he thought about what to say and decided that the honest thing was also the true thing, and that those were not always the same, but in this case they were. "And the day I walked into this building," he said, "I had 3 years of looking for something I was afraid I wasn't going to find. And I walked in here with a story that was already written in my head, and I was prepared for the possibility that the building was just a building, and Victor Aldrin was just a man with enough distance between himself and what had happened that I'd never be able to close it." And he paused. "And what closed it was you." She looked at him. "Not your father's mistake," he said. "Not the documents, you. The way you looked at something that didn't fit the picture and kept looking at it instead of deciding to stop." He held her gaze. "That's not nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "And there's something else I want to do," he said. "Not for me, tell me, the 3 names. I want them in the wall in the lobby, and not a plaque on a stand, not a display case. In the stone, at eye level, at the main entrance." He paused. "So people walk past them every morning and every evening. So it's just a thing that's there. The way everything important should just be there." She didn't hesitate. "And done," she said. He nodded. She pushed off the wall. "Will you come back after everything is done?" "To see us," he said. "I'll come back to see it." And she walked toward the elevator. He watched her go. Then he finished cleaning the filtration unit, because it still needed doing, and he was still here, and the work was still the work, regardless of everything else. He found Theo in the parking structure at 5:40, and his son was sitting on the hood of his car, looking at the concrete ceiling of the structure, the way he looked at things when he was trying to work something out. And the thing was large enough that looking at it directly didn't help, and he heard Darnell's footsteps and looked over. They stood for a moment without speaking. The parking structure was cold in the specific way. Enclosed spaces were cold in October, the kind of cold that had been gathering all day and would still be there in the morning. "And I've been thinking about what you told me," Theo said, "in the diner, about Cedric and Raymond and Jerome." He stopped. "About what you've been carrying. It wasn't a burden," Darnell said, "and it was a debt." Theo looked at him. "What's the difference? A burden is something you put down when you get tired. A debt is something you pay until it's paid." He paused. "This one's paid." Theo looked at him for a long moment, and the look of someone who was deciding how much to believe and then deciding to believe all of it. "Are you okay?" Darnell thought about that. Not the quick version. Not the version designed to reassure, and the real version, the one that required actually going through the day, and everything in it, and checking. He thought about Victor's face in the office this morning, about Bryn in the lobby, about Beverly Marsh saying good morning at 10:20 on a Wednesday in October, and about Elroy in the security room talking about Jerome and cards, and the point being what happened in the middle, about Celeste standing in the supply corridor telling him about Sandra Okafor's phone. He thought about the names that were going into the stone, and "I will be," he said. "Give me a little time." Theo nodded. He looked at the ceiling again, looked back. "You could come to Atlanta," he said, not looking at Darnell when he said it, using the ceiling as cover. "I have the place. I have the second room. It's just sitting there." And Darnell looked at his son. Theo was doing the thing Darnell recognized, because he had done it himself at that age in different circumstances, and offering something important in the most casual possible register, so that if it was refused, the refusal wouldn't have to be about what it was actually about. "And yeah," Darnell said. Theo looked at him fast. "For a while," Darnell said. Theo looked back at the ceiling, nodded once. "Okay," he said, the word carrying everything he wasn't going to say about what it meant, which was considerable. "Okay," Darnell said, and they stood in the cold parking structure for a few more minutes, not talking, not needing to. He went back into the building one last time. Just him, no cart. And he came through the side entrance and walked through the service corridor to the lobby, because that was the way he had always come in, and the way he wanted to come in for this. And the lobby was empty of the day's events now. Late afternoon light coming through the glass front, gold and long, the way October light was late in the day when the sky finally cleared. It hit the marble floor and stretched across it in the particular way it had always stretched, and the way he had noticed on his first morning 14 months ago, when he had arrived before anyone else and stood in the empty lobby and counted cameras and exits and wondered if he was wrong about everything, and he stood in the center of the lobby. The wall to the left of the main entrance was plain stone, smooth, at eye level with a person walking in. He stood and looked at it and thought about the three names going into it. Not in a case, not on a stand, in the stone itself, and permanent the way the building was permanent. Cedric Allen, Raymond Okafor, Jerome Banks. People would walk past those names every morning, not knowing who they were, most of them, and not knowing what they had done, or where they had been, or what the last few minutes of their lives had looked like in a corridor that was supposed to be clear. And they would walk past and see three names in the stone, and some of them would stop once in a while, and some of them wouldn't, and that was fine. That was exactly right. That was what it meant to be remembered instead of memorialized, and to be present in the ordinary motion of a day, rather than set apart from it under glass. And he stood there for a while. He let himself feel everything that the lobby held. The morning 14 months ago. The coffee and Victor's voice, and the 30 people who had watched without looking, and the nights in the parking structure, and the conversations near the freight elevator, and the 12th floor recycling, and Elroy's 2 taps on the window, and everything that had moved, slowly and quietly and without announcement, from that first morning to this one, and he let it be what it was. And then he turned and walked out through the main entrance. The air outside was cold and clean. The sky had resolved itself sometime in the afternoon into something clear and honest, and very blue at the horizon, and the city moved around him with its complete indifference, which was not a criticism, but a fact. The city had its own work, and he was one person walking out of one building on one block of it, and that was exactly the right scale for what this moment was. And he walked, not toward the parking structure, not anywhere specific. And just down the block, and then the next block, and then the one after that. Moving through the city the way he had moved through buildings and corridors and operational environments for the better part of his adult life, and with his eyes open and his hands still, and his weight carried in the way that was his and had always been his. And he thought about Jerome Banks calling his brother from wherever in the world the army had put him that week, and finding a phone, and finding the time. And because that was who Jerome was, and Jerome knew that the people worth calling were worth calling from anywhere. And he thought about Cedric Allen's hands moving when he talked. He thought about Raymond Okafor, 28 years old, 3 weeks from his wedding. He held them. He held them the way he had carried them for 7 years, which was completely and without putting them down. And then, slowly, and walking west on a Chicago street in the clear October afternoon, and he let them rest. And not let them go. Rest. There was a difference. And he had always known there was a difference, and now he felt it in a way he hadn't before, and the specific quality of a thing that had been carried a long distance being set down. Not because you were done with it, but because it had arrived where it was always supposed to arrive, and it could stop moving now. And he walked. The city moved around him, enormous and indifferent and completely alive. A truck downshifting on the avenue. 2 women with coffee walking faster than the people around them, and a kid on a bicycle navigating the gap between a parked car and a bus with the specific confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times. All of it ordinary, all of it exactly right. He had been a soldier, and he had been an operator in rooms and environments that most people would never see and could not imagine. And he had been a man with a wooden box in a cold parking structure, and a cart in a corporate lobby, and a debt that had taken 3 years to locate and 14 months to settle. And now he was just a man walking west on a Chicago street in October, with the sound of the city around him, and Atlanta at the end of a drive, and a second room waiting, and a son who had driven up without calling, 'cause he was worried, and that was its own kind of answer to a lot of things. And he walked until the light changed. Then he turned and went to get his truck.